Thank you all for joining us today in what promises to be an engaging and impactful discussion about the upcoming election and the unique perspectives of young voters. Your voices and priorities are not only shaping the present, but are crucial to the future of our communities and our nation. So we're here to gather firsthand insight on what matters most to you, whether or not it's the economy, climate action, education, social justice, or other pressing issues. So today, we invite you to share your thoughts openly as we explore how these priorities can guide decisions and policies in the years to come. So, your participation and your ideas will play a key role in informing a broader understanding of youth priorities as we approach this pivotal election.
Let's
Okay?
jump into it. Thank you again, Ms. Vonna Willingham, for choosing the Albany Black Chamber of Commerce to collaborate on this initiative. We all know how important national elections are, but more crucial than that are our local ones. And so while we're gearing up for this national election, I want to make sure that the charge is there so that this is not a one-time thing. This is something that we get into practice and do year round. So thank you again. I'm looking forward to the feedback. We're going to make sure that young people know that their voice needs to be heard. You are no longer, right, the people of the future. You are the people for today. So thank you again for your participation, and let's jump right on in, okay? So I'm going to start off with the first question, which is, what are the top issues that influence your decision to vote? How many of you will this be your first time casting your vote in this election?
This is my first time.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Excited to
Great.
hear that.
That's
So
great.
let's
That's
start
great.
right with you all. Being that this is your first time, you have been experiencing day to day life in this country. Tell us what issues are important to you.
Yeah, so me personally, I have a finance background. So I love like financial literacy and I'm really involved with my community. So the economic policies and social justice policies are most personal to me, which I feel influence my vote.
For me, I would say coming from a Caribbean background, just immigrant policy with that whole thing that's happening in New York City and just around the world, I feel like that's very important to highlight as just being Americans. And this is what our country is built upon. I would say the economic values as well. And for me as a woman, I have to say the abortion policy as well that's going on in the southern side of the country is very important, which is driving me to go to the polls and get that vote in.
Right, that's right. How about you all? What are the issues that are important?
Sure. So for me, I am a officer candidate intended to be in the United States Marine Corps. So for me, it's national security, our relationships with some countries abroad, and how we're represented, as well as the dynamic as a New Yorican. I have all my grandparents were from Puerto Rico, so it's a little interesting to see how we're represented, how we're discussed in closed doors on both sides of the aisle.
Not even closed doors anymore. Very public ones, right?
Wow, this is a very loaded question. I have a lot of different issues of concern. As a woman, similarly, reproductive justice, healthcare access is very important, especially as a black woman. You know, when we think about maternal mortality, we see what's happening. It's really important that we are getting equitable and inclusive healthcare. So that's something of the utmost importance to me. I'm also an educator, so education is a very big thing for me. We're seeing book bans, we're seeing limitations on what students are able to learn. We're seeing limitations on the curriculum that we can teach in school now, right? So it's really important that we prioritize education so that people that are coming after us, they can grow up being knowledgeable and understanding of things that are happening.
Oh, that was great. I think as someone who's just entered their mid 20s, there's a lot of issues that are personal and hit home to me. Somebody who comes from a large matriarchal family, women's right to choose and reproductive rights is something that hits close to home. So that's something that I'm researching a lot and looking into policy, as well as education and kind of bridging that wealth gap. For someone who's worked closely with underserved communities throughout my professional career, seeing that impact and seeing what people go through day to day financially is super important. So seeing how we're going to bridge that gap and what policies those candidates are putting out there to kind of fix those social issues is something I'm looking at closely.
Okay, so I have a question, you know, as a politician and someone who represents this area. What I'd like to know is, do you feel represented by your current political leaders, and why or why not? And and not just locally, but I'd like to know your position on the national scene too, if you feel you're represented.
I think since this is one of the main elections that we'll see more of our generation getting involved, I think it's still getting to that point. So our voices are now being heard way more, and I think it's gonna translate more into a reflection of our generation really being seen more. But I still think it's in the phase of the older generation still representing. But I know that there are locally as well. I'm not sure about nationally, but there are still some representations of young leaders emerging into politics. So I think it's still getting to that point. It's like a slower transition, but at this point, naturally, I don't think we're so represented. But our problems are being listened to, though. I would say that.
So now, are you saying is in regards to the actual person that is in
Yeah.
office, or the issues and the policies that they are trying to legislate as far as representation is concerned?
Yep, I think the representation is physically, but I think what issues that we care about are being represented in the space politically, but physically, I don't think it has been on a large scale across the country where we're seeing our generation really be represented.
I would say for me, personally, it's a really good question, by the way, but I would say honestly, not really. Especially as like a black woman and an African American, just period. I would say no, because there's a lot of laws that really hasn't been passed. For me personally, I would say an example is a black hate crime bill. I feel like throughout these generations, these years, we have been marginalized. We've been, a lot of stuff has happened. I feel like if we had more representation in these places of power, we would have had that. And we just don't really have someone like that to reflect that. And of course, it is getting better now because you're here, so I'm very grateful for you. And there's other people that's in the Senate that's doing these big things, and you're knocking these doors down. So thank you for that. But I do feel like there's so much more for us to do, and I feel like in my generation, a lot of us is on social media, and I feel like we have to take that energy and that power and that cancel culture and put that into the voting, the polls. So I feel like there's a lot more work for us to do as a generation, Gen Z, millennials, however you want to put it. There's a lot more work for us to do. But I do feel like as of right now, whether it's going through immigration, whether it's going through healthcare, there's a lot that shows that we're not there, that we're not currently in those powers making those decisions, because those stuff wouldn't be happening if it was a clear reflection of who we are as a country.
Well, you know what? I just have to ask this question as you all begin to answer. I want you to apply your influence in your response, because I think that for a long period of time, right now what I see is the national scene has really overtaken, the local scene, because what happens nationally has actually met us at our own doorsteps, okay, with people coming from New York City, coming from to here, where, they've been transported from Venezuela and all those different places and so forth. So it's that national scene really is the local scene too. And so I just want to understand how you influence what we do locally and what your opinions are in regards to, what they're doing in Washington and the money that they're talking about as far as the wall is concerned, and bringing people from, wherever they're coming from. How does that affect you locally? That's what I want to know. And how can you influence your representatives to change policies or to put in new policies?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and answer. I think me as an individual, seeing representation in politics has never clicked for me. So it kind of felt like the political scene and being included in lawmaking is not a space where I feel 100% comfortable to speak on issues that hit close to home. And so I think more recently, being in a space where people who look like me and think like me are empowered and are in positions of power have helped me feel more comfortable in voicing my opinions and what and how I want to feel where I live and what those laws do and how they impact me personally. And I think if we had more mentorship and community and people coming together instead of going against one another, I think people would feel more comfortable to be able to speak freely. And then in turn, when you acquire that confidence, you're able to be like, okay, this is what I think, this is how I think. I hope that you can respect that, but also I want to be able to hear what that other person has to say. And I think with that mutual respect produces that confidence and produces that influence and, kind of fosters that communication to where our generation is saying, hey, we can actually do this if we come together and we build that community.
I like what you said there, Justin, because I think about my particular background. From Albany, New York, right? Born further upstate. I always say I'm a true upstate girl. I was born in the Finger Lakes area, moved to this area when I was 2 years old, stayed until I was 18, and I relocated to Atlanta, Georgia, where I attended college. And my political experience here versus there, two different experiences. What I will say is, it was only different by virtue of the landscape and the demographic, right? I had the privilege of growing up watching you do the work that you're continuing to do. So when we're talking about how this affects our current generation, do we see that representation? What I have noticed is that the same people who have been doing it have been doing it for years. And what we're not doing the greatest job at, which was why I was so happy to come back to take this role, is to bridge that intergenerational gap, right? To be able to make sure that there was space and opportunity separate and apart from when it's time to vote, separate and apart from when these one-off issues, right, where you're gathering people just for that, and then you go on about your business and you see each other next year when it's time to vote again, right? I got to watch you, your sister, and the community of African Americans here who fought for social justice day in and day out. What I didn't see is a lot of that representation carry in the generations after. And so what I'm loving is that we're seeing fresh new faces in these offices, in the city office, in the county office, because you cannot do it separate and apart. You have to welcome all perspectives, all backgrounds, and all generations. And the only way to do that is to be able to provide platform and space. And so that's where the chamber has been integral, and where we continue to make sure that there is opportunity for these generations to come together so that you don't have to retire and feel like there is nobody I can pass this on to, right? But that you have the opportunity to get students in a space where they do feel comfortable, where they are continuously engaged, and where they see themselves represented. I used to always say I had no plans in working in politics. I left New York for that reason, right? We know that this is a heavily government state, and I went to Atlanta and ended up working for 3 mayoral administrations, right? So it unfortunately couldn't run away from that. But I think about the representation when we're talking about, African American leaders, and specifically for me, Black female leaders. I think about Jasmine Crockett. I think about Letitia James. I think about the mayor that I worked with, Keisha Lance Bottoms, and I think about watching their journey and seeing. How, in spite of, right, even with the education background, even with the credentials, how excruciating sometimes that process can be. However, I see them continuing to reach back to make sure that there is someone to pass that information along as they continue to climb. And so I think that's really important and valuable for us to consider as we are building synergy here with our young people.
I kind of had maybe the reverse experience. So I am originally from Brooklyn, New York. I grew up in politics all my life. There's like council, like the council level politics that I've grown up with, even like PTA. My mother was very active in PTA when I was a child. So I grew up in a community where social justice has always been a very big deal for me. I did end up going to college away from home, and I actually was in Pennsylvania. So not only was it a culture shock, but in terms of representation for political leaders or even the people that I was surrounded by, it was a completely different experience than what I was familiar with and I was used to, I should say. So when I think about representation, at the national level, I will say I personally don't think we are there yet with the representation. I'm hoping that there will be a change, but I do believe it starts with us, right? Kind of going back to education. When it comes to civic engagement and the understanding of how policies and laws are even created, has a lot to do with education. Civic engagement is not really something that's taught in school. Even when it comes to like looking at research, it shows that there's so little funding that goes to civic engagement even at the federal level. So if you're not teaching people, they're not going to know. They're not going to know. And then when you look at historically marginalized communities who don't have access to those resources to educate themselves, that's kind of how we end up with people who are afraid of voting because they don't understand. They don't understand how much power that they hold. And when you spoke about empowerment, it does go hand in hand with education. You have to be educated to be empowered. So I think the role that we have as young voters, as young professionals, young people in general, we educate ourselves. I think being an educator, so it's such a passion for me because I understand that I'm able to help shape the mind and the behaviors of those that will come after us. And like we said, education equals empowerment.
You know, one thing I do want to say is that when you don't feel that you are shaping the future, you are. Because one of the things that came out of this whole election, and the reasons why I've heard from some young people, was the whole student loan piece. Now, that generates from young people.
Yes.
Okay, and so your opinions about that, it has reached the national level. Okay, and so I know just how do you feel about how that, let's say, the student loans are being handled as far as a concern of yours, and because it has been something that is driven by young people, young professionals who are trying to get out from under those student loans, and said that that was the reason why they weren't going to vote for certain people. And so, I just want to know your opinion on that. But I also want to voice the fact that you are being heard.
I would say student loans definitely, I agree, very, very important because I feel like people are drowning with all this debt and they're trying to just get out and do what they have to do. But what this shows me overall is that if we can put our minds together to make the student loans go viral, imagine what we could do. Whether it's different laws that we want pushed, we have to take that energy, foster it, and push ideals that we want to happen. So it shows me that we can do that in different aspects, whether it's economically, whether it's healthcare, immigration status, whatever it is, we can all do that together.
That's interesting.
In regards to the question for education and student loans, I've always tried to have this conversation with people who don't go to college, who haven't gone to college, who don't have to deal with student loans, and the perspective that their taxes would go towards something that they would never benefit from. I think it's interesting to see that perspective as well. From someone who's never gone to a private university, the University of Albany is the third school I've been to. And every single school has been a public school. I think for certain states that can't afford it, I think every public institution, at least a 2-year associate's degree should be free, my opinion. If you're under a certain income, I'm pretty sure you're leaving the school debt-free regardless, but I think it should be a universal thing. I know a lot of European countries have that lavish experience of going to school for free, whether that's a 2-year or 4-year school. I think this country makes way too much money to not to be able to afford that for at least half the population. But I can definitely understand that sentiment of people who have never gone to college should not want their taxes going towards something they would never benefit from if they went to trade school or if they're an entrepreneur and would never benefit from a degree. I completely comprehend that sentiment. In regards to the question previously, if I feel represented in local or federal, state, or national government, I would say on a local level, I definitely feel that connection more to my district representation. That when they return here, whether that be via the court or in a Senate meeting, I think what's difficult on a national level is the influence of lobbyists, the influence of corporations and major donors that are always going to have a presence and influence on decisions being made. And that influence will never be shown to people in the public. And I think that's the shadiness of Congress and what turns people off from politics in general is that while you might vote for someone, their vote is usually collectivized by their party, and their party is usually influenced by donors that you do not see most of the time. Sometimes you do see that. But I find it difficult to find any connection to someone on a national level because they're always influenced, again, by their party, and then their party is influenced by donors or lobbyists. It's the
So,
reality.
there's a question here then. It says, what would motivate you to vote? But then how could you motivate the next one to vote also? What would you do to help motivate? And first of all, what would motivate you to vote?
I think what would motivate me to vote is a conversation I've had with a few different people would be possibly restructuring our electoral college. I think what's difficult about dividing a certain amount of votes to an entire state and the populist vote of that state being the majority of all those votes going to a specific side. I think what would be easier is what we've seen in another part of the country where the electoral votes are based off the population of the county, and the majority of that county would receive, or rather the results of those county votes, regardless of their electoral number, would go to a specific candidate rather than an entire state being doing that. I think it's destructive for states to historically vote in one direction or another. I think it's difficult for people to find meaning in voting outside of where they've historically gone, especially in New York State. We haven't voted red since Reagan. That's the mid 80s. He's no longer living, so I could tell you how old he is. And the same goes for red states, how they've historically gone red, and there are blue counties who don't feel represented. And I think it's difficult for people to find meaning if whoever they vote for feels like a waste of time.
That's a great point.
It is. I think one thing that you do miss, especially now in this national election, is right now we're more focused, on who's going to be in the White House. Okay. At the same time, there are local elections going on that is going to put people in Congress. And so we're missing that. As we look here between Albany County and Rensselaer County, there's elections going on that's going to determine who's going to be in Washington or who's going to be in the Capitol. That's right across, almost directly across the street from here. So, and that actually determines as you put it, those lobbyists and it gets past the electoral college. Once those people are actually put into office, they drive the majority leader, the Speaker of the House, and and so forth. And so I want you to keep that in mind when you talk about elections. So
Yep. So we talked earlier about the best way to get information out, right? Bridging that gap and making sure that we're getting our young people engaged. And so I think politics is one of those ways that has just been historically traditional. And so we still do door-to-door campaigning, right? That's the most effective, right? You'll get in front of someone, you catch them while they're home in their environment, right? And you speak to them about your particular issues and causes. But we also know that we live in a very digital age. And so what you can do in 15 seconds with your phone is far more and far reaching than what we've been able to do in the past. So I want to ask you all, how do you all prefer to receive your information? What do you see coming and going day to day that engages you to be involved? How should we go about making sure that our youth are engaged and want to be a part of this electoral process?
Yes, I think naturally a lot of young people intake information through social media. Of course, that poses the question of how reliable that information is that we're getting. But I know that's the most popular form that we intake stuff. I think it's also really important to have a space within our own of young people to discuss and educate, as you said, because I know the impact it has when somebody that is your peer, they see you involved or see that, oh, this person's voting, and it really causes them, because your parents can tell you to do something, or older people. So when you see it within your own group and peers, I think that's really influential. And with social media, I think there's been a lot of platforms that have been able to get their point across and reach the audience. It'll be really good to put sources and stuff like that, because we could say check sources, but most people may not take that initiative. I try to when I can, but it becomes really hard when you always hear common stuff, and it may not even be the truth online. So I think everybody has their own responsibility to dive in deeper into what they see on social media, but I think it helps move the needle forward when we have stuff on social media talking about politics and have sources and stuff that could be fact checked. But in person dialogue and connection really needs to be more pushed for this generation, because it's more impactful that way. As a student leader on campus, I know how important it is to interact with students on a one-on-one basis. When you mentioned Bridging the Gap, we had an event here at the Chamber, Bridging the Gap, where young professionals were able to connect with recruiters and older professionals. And a lot of students have spoke to me that in-person connection really helped them a lot. You could see stuff on social media about how to help you in your journey as a young professional, but when you interact and talk to people, that's one of the best ways to connect and grow and really move forward in your journey.
Absolutely.
I want to echo your points. I agree, definitely social media. But similarly, growing up in a matriarchal family, in an older family, I think there's a lot that we can benefit from talking to older generations. Specifically, I talk to Wanda all the time. I have the privilege of working with Wanda, and we have a lot of great conversations where she's educated me so much on things that I wouldn't have even known about, even when it comes to voting, right? Just the power that we have, even at the local level, like schools. I didn't even realize how impactful that is. So I think when it comes to, sources and getting information, it is beneficial to speak with the older generation because they have the wisdom, they have the knowledge, they have the experience. And when we talk about fact checking, that's a big thing that I always tell my students to make sure we're looking at reputable sources, right? So for those that are in college, we do have the privilege of accessing scholarly peer-reviewed articles and journals, right? But for those who don't have that, they're not able to access that, there's different resources like the library, right? We can go to the library to get that information. And if we're looking on social media about fact-checking, sites like X, for example, they do have something called note. So if there's misinformation or disinformation on a tweet, for example, there are ways to correct that information. I'm a researcher, so one thing I do all the time, if I see an article written by somebody, I go look up that person, I look up their credentials, maybe what things that they've published before. I think that is helpful, and clicking links that are attached to some of the things that we do read, those news articles that we read, even the newspaper. Like the newspaper still exists, People think that it doesn't. It absolutely still exists. We also have New York Times, leveraging the access that you have and the privilege you have as students to use the sources that you have are like some of the best ways to get, the correct information.
And for me, what I will say, I definitely agree with what you're going to say. I was going to literally say something on that point. But I would say as a news producer, one thing I definitely realize is that social media is very pushing when it comes to voting, talking to older people. But I really do want to stress the idea of fact-checking and knowing where where all your information is coming from. So sorry. Because I feel like while social media does push very fastly and stuff go trending and viral, you do have to push the idea of making sure the information is correct, and who is writing that is very important. Because whether it's like a news station, you can know when you're watching CNN, and you can know when you're watching Fox, you can know when you're watching ABC. And this is why reading is fundamental, why you have to kind of bring that idea to yourself. So whenever I'm doing my news and I'm writing a script, I always tell myself, I want this person, the viewer, to make the story in their head. I don't want to be the person that's going to push whether it's going to be Democratic, Independent, Republican. I want you to take this story and you make it what it is and make your own idea from whatever I wrote on. So that's something that I feel like is very important, is fact checking and making sure it's not really biased.
I would love to build off that quickly. I think I agree that social media is like the greatest information tool in history. I think it's dangerous, as you referenced, that one of the few sites, major platforms rather, in X, does the third party notes to correct people on certain things, and they do list the outlet as well. I think what's incredibly dependent for other social media sites, X as well, but Instagram and TikTok, which are incredibly algorithm based, and the more you interact with one sort of content, it'll feed that to you every single day and never show you a different opinion. I think that's so damaging to brainwash people into thinking one way or the other. And people have been systemically viewed that since they were teenagers, some of them before. So I think that's incredibly dangerous. In terms of referencing some media outlets like ABC, CNN, Fox News, the New York Times, I think what has turned people off from legacy media is how much they are bought and paid for by one party or the other. For people to say they are bipartisan but grossly overly report on one candidate over the other, or in one day, just completely switch because someone got the reins to be in charge. And I think it's really hard for people to find authenticity and believe the other things they say because of how inconsistently they report on one aspect or another.
Oh, wow.
We're in good hands, Miss
Yes, we
Willingham.
are.
These young people are ready. They are informed, and I really love to hear this feedback because you all are a digital and a virtual generation, right? Most of how you were raised and learned, we had encyclopedias. We had to go look things up. Now, you know what I mean? Like we had to actually know how to read, right? You all literally could just say it into your phone, and it's there. And so, understanding how privileged that is, but also how dangerous it can be, and making sure that you are aware for yourselves and sharing that is really good to hear that you all know about fact checking and know how to go about doing that. Yeah.
Oh, just sitting here, there's something that he brought up about all of a sudden the same thing keeps showing up on your page. And just last week, I was saying to myself, why am I seeing just this over and over again? And my sister said, I posted something, did you see it? I said, no, I didn't see it. I wonder why. She says, well, I don't know, for some reason or other, I don't seem to be reaching you. Yeah. Okay? And so what I'm thinking about now is, let's say, when they did the debates, okay, they only had certain people that were asking the questions. And what just came to my mind, instead of having like you said, you're a news producer, okay? To me, there should have been, instead of dividing people up by what news, paper or whatever it is that they represented, should have been divided up by, let's say, you are of what ethnicity? Puerto Rican. Okay, so you're Puerto Rican. Okay, so I in my family, because we are so diverse right now. Okay, I have two Puerto Rican grandchildren. My grandson, he chooses to identify as Puerto Rican. Okay, and so at the same time, in my sister's family, she's Sudanese because her father is from Sudan. I mean, we're so diverse and so integrated right now. So to me, the debates should have included ethnic groups, should have included young people, whether they were black, whether they were white. There should have been different age groups represented in those debates, and then we would have been able to attack more and understand more of what people really wanted to hear, okay? As I told some of you earlier, I have the privilege of having to listen to 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, and 50-year-olds. Even my 30-year-olds, okay, has the young people that have different opinions than they do, okay. And the main reason why I want to do this, as my office began to become younger, I realized that I had to keep up because of my own family members saying, making me feel like, Mom, Grandma, you're behind. Okay? And I realized if I was going to keep my policies fresh and to ensure that the perspectives, the people in my office know that that's a huge issue with me right now, that I have the perspectives that represents more than just me. Because if it doesn't, I know that I'm not doing my job to really make sure that policies are fresh, that they don't just represent, let's say, and I'll just use a small group, suburbs as opposed to urban, okay? Seniors as opposed to young people, unhoused people. When it comes to housing policies, we have to represent those people that don't have voices, that are on the streets, okay? Those kids that age out of foster care, that also become unhoused in certain instances. So for me, it's very important that I hear what you have to say, okay? The national scene. What I would like to know right now, I visited San Diego a couple of months ago, and the war is on, okay, and it's a huge issue. And a lot of you think that it's being driven by people in Washington, and you say special interests. Well, I can tell you right now, it's the young people that are out in the streets, and I think it was you that brought that up to me. What was going on in the 70s now is repeating what's going on today. So I want to know what your feelings are in regards to how we need to be supporting different parties, excuse me, not parties, how different countries, and how it affects young people here. You all know what the dreamers are, isn't that correct? Okay, but also those young people that are coming in and have to more or less interpret. Okay, there are different programs, social programs that parents need to, let's say, get into for their families. The mothers or the fathers may not speak English. They're relying on the children to interpret for them what is being said to them, and they have to, in turn, then speak it to their parents. So I want to know, what do you think? What does that do to you? What does that, say to you about how really powerful young people are? I mean, in schools right now, we have over 30-something different languages being spoken right here in the Albany City School District. What do you think about that? Okay, and so what can we do to affect those young people? And what can you do as a news producer, okay, make sure that the thoughts and the ideas of our young people is out there? Because the one thing that we have heard, when they talk about swing states, one thing they know now, I don't think it's just swing states. They're now saying that you all are going to be the ones who decide who becomes president of the United States. And you really need to hear that, because we know it. But what I want to know, do you know it?
I think one thing I'll say really quick, I think it is important that we embrace the opinions of young people, because I think now there's a transition of adulthood. And so the Gen Z had a stigma of like, oh, the young people, they just don't really know what they're talking about. They're just doing whatever. They don't really understand life. So I think it could limit the amount of people who feel comfortable voicing their opinions, even though we still see people protesting and standing up for what they believe in. But there are also a lot of young people that may feel like they are not an adult yet, can't really say. But in the election, all of our voices matter. So it's important for young people to vote, because it shows that what you think actually matters. It can make an impact on this country, and to kind of go against that childlike behavior, like, oh, you're just young and just stay over there. So I think being more welcoming to the thoughts and opinions of what young people have to say, instead of just criticizing what they're saying, being open to listen. I think it could go both ways as well, that we could listen to what the older generation has to say and have a lot of respect for that experience, but also for the young people's experience to be respected as well.
The old generation. Go ahead.
For me, one thing I will say, just going to the 30 languages in the Albany City Schools, that's really amazing. But my manager, I would never forget, he told me that the main reason why he hired me, of course, that I was a good writer or whatever, but also he stressed that he's a Jewish man, and he's really old, and he's been doing his position for years.
We're going to give him some new words. It's okay.
Sorry, no, okay.
Elder.
He's an elder. He's been doing it for years, and he told me, he looked at me, and by the way, I'm the only black woman there. I'm the only black person there, point blank, besides like a reporter. But I'm the only black news producer. And he said that he felt that a black woman like me deserved that position. He said, "You earned it. You're here, and I brought you in here because you're like, look at these other guys. They're all the same. They all live the same life. They, they all grew up kind of in the same experience. They're white males, and you're different, and you're gonna bring something to this newsroom. Whether it's reporting, you're getting that insight from a different way. You're gonna report it differently because guess what? You lived a whole different life." So he always stressed to me to not feel insecure, to not feel anxiety or anything, but just to feel comfortable because you're here and you earned it. So just saying that, whether it's going to the languages, I'm happy that we're able to now. We do see a little bit of reflection, whether it's in the schools. A couple years ago, they probably weren't doing 30 languages, but there's so much different people. You have to. Why would you not do it? So I feel like representation, whether it's in different cultures, whether it's different communities, that's amazing. And for me, coming from Brooklyn, I'm from Brooklyn as well. I'm from Flatbush, so we have the Labor Day parade there. We have a lot of Caribbean people there. Yeah, a little Caribbean. So for me, I always felt very comfortable. But when I went to college, in Buffalo and I transferred to UA, I did feel like, oh, there's not as much like Caribbean people here. And, that did kind of alter it a little bit. So I feel like just being inclusive, whether it comes to cultures, languages, however you want to put it, it definitely helps us in the forefront when it comes to voting, housing, healthcare, equality. Just being inclusive and having everything. Sudan, like he's Puerto Rican. That's amazing because, we're redoing the whole generation. Yeah.
I'd like to piggyback off of what Troy is saying, but I think in terms of getting young people to feel like their vote matters or what they have to say matters, kind of if you look historically, like we are facing the same social issues from decades ago. And, like if we look at philanthropy and people making donations and social services, people are still unhoused. People are still on welfare. People still need Section 8 housing credits. How are we, putting, millions, billions of dollars towards these social issues, privately, publicly, and we're still seeing people on the streets addicted to drugs. And I think people in our age group are fed up of people not getting the services they need, and they're not. We're looking at a mental health crisis, and I think that's part of the reason why our generation is like, politics is not for me. I can't handle seeing bad news every day. I don't know, seeing the war with Israel and Palestine, kind of seeing this, mirage of like, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, all of these like theories and things like that. What's reality versus what is not? And I think mentally that takes a toll on that generation because they don't have the resources to handle it. And I think if we put a lot more effort in saying, okay, we as a group can come together and we're capable, we need to do this together. It can't just be one person. It can't just be the people who are already in office. What are we doing as a group, as a generation, to take those next steps to try and actually fix these issues? I don't think any of them could ever 100% be fixed, but we can definitely make a dent in it. And I think if we kind of do a better job at conveying that message, saying, me as an individual person, does my individual vote matter on a national level? I didn't always think that it did. But to your point, looking locally, if we start there, start small, and that snowball effect will build up, I think we'll get there.
I just have to ask Bria to just do like 2 minutes on the survey that the young people in the office put together.
Yes. So, some of my colleagues and I, we created what's called the Young Voters Initiative, which essentially the goal of YVI, as we call it, was to bridge the gap, of course, between older generations, younger generations, but specifically focusing on priorities of young voters and voting behavior specifically. Why do people want to vote? Specifically, what is pushing younger voters to vote? So we created this survey. We asked a couple of questions. We offered some options of like socio-political issues of concern. Some of them we've actually discussed. Most of them we've discussed actually. We distributed this survey to our network, which is far and wide. Like I said, I'm from New York City, so a lot of my friends back home took it, but majority of the people that took this survey was Albany residents. So when we decided to do the analysis, we wanted to look at different things. So we looked at an overarching view of the survey, but we honed in also on 18 to 34 as the young demographic. We also looked at Albany County residents and what were some of their concerns, their issues, barriers to voting, their motivation to voting. One of the biggest takeaways definitely is a lack of information, right? So whether it's younger generations, whether it's older generations, first time voters, seasoned voters, people really don't have the information that they need. And when we say information, it can be in terms of the voting process. How does it work, right? A lot of people don't understand the electoral college, like you mentioned, right? They don't understand 270 votes. They don't understand what that means. A lot of people don't even know where their polls are. They don't know about early voting. They also don't know how to find information on policies, right? We spoke a lot about, as young voters, we are policy driven, right? For me, what motivates me to vote is policies. What are we doing to change the way that I live, the way that you live, the way that all of us live, right? And when we reflected on our survey and the analysis, it seems like a lot of young voters and older voters alike, they want to see representation. They want to see candidates whose values align with theirs, whose policies align with theirs. When we looked at the socio-political issues, the top three that we saw from what we offered, of course, were housing was a big thing, right? We are in a housing crisis. There are so many unhoused people. And you mentioned people, like the younger people, they're seeing this, but they're not just seeing it, they're living it, right? When we think about the people that are unhoused, it's not just because of addiction, it's not just because of mental health crisis. There's people who are a part of the LGBTQ community who are being displaced. There's people who are immigrants who don't have anywhere to go. There are people who look just like you and I who don't have a home to go to. And that was one of the biggest things. Healthcare, of course, was at the top. I'm not surprised about healthcare being at the top because that is one of my biggest concerns. We need to be able to be healthy. We can't live if we're unwell. We can't do the work if we're unwell. And also reproductive justice, another big thing as women. And it's more than just, of course, abortion, but family planning, the ability to access contraceptives, the ability to make choices on your own body, your own health concerns. All of these things are really important. And even some of the things that were lower on the survey in terms of like foster care, senior services, taxes, my colleagues and I spoke a lot about as young adults, the things that are important to us. I'm also in my mid-20s, but I pay rent. I have bills. I have responsibilities. And it is important that we are focusing on the economy, not just in terms of loans and in debt, but making sure that people have opportunities, smaller businesses, making sure we're promoting those who might not have the resources to be in a better financial standing, right? So a lot of the things that we were seeing on the lower end of the political, socio-political scale in terms of importance, everything's important, right? And we see that the young voters are a little less concerned about those things right now because they're like, well, senior services doesn't impact me, but everything is interconnected. I'm pretty sure you have a parent who will hopefully get older, or a grandparent, or somebody that you know who will get older. And it might not impact you now, but it's going to impact you at some point. So essentially, our overarching thing that we've seen is just making sure that the young voters know that all of these issues are important, even if it doesn't directly impact them. And now we're trying to focus more on like voting efforts. How can we get people to vote? There's barriers that prevent them. So information, of course, is one of those barriers, but just not having that desire, not thinking their vote counts, not thinking that their voice is important. And that's why we're here today, to show people the importance of the young vote and the importance of using your voice, using your platform, and using your privilege, because people fought for us to be able to vote, so we should be able to go out there and vote.
Well, I mean, listen, you The students and the young, our young professionals have said it all. I think, again, we are in great hands, and I want to continue to drive that force, especially, like I said, being a resident and a native of this particular area and bringing all of what I've learned back to be able to fill these gaps, right? They existed while I was here. I came back and it felt like nothing changed in that regard. And so I understood how important the Chamber of Commerce, the Albany Black Chamber Social Club, the Albany Black Chamber Foundation, all those iterations were intentional so that we could make sure that we touched the business community, the community at large, and just people day to day, right? And so that our presence, though it is exceptional, is not unusual. I saw a quote that said that I attended an HBCU and it was the first time that I got to be around people like me, and it wasn't so, oh, you're so amazing, you're so stellar. It was normal, right? That absolutely exists in this particular region. It's just that we don't get those opportunities, right? I hear the story about Liana and her experience with the news channel, and in her journey to get there, right? She had applied and and was unfortunate that they did not see the quality until she interned with the chamber, right? And when she put that on there, it gave her that boost. It gave that vouch that, okay, she was still the same person with the same writing experience, but having this particular platform is so important. So again, it's not anything exceptional, it is normal. And so making sure that we are standing in those gaps, though the chamber is absolutely bipartisan, we still want to be a platform to make sure that all feedback and this dialogue continues so that we're just pushing the narrative forward that voting all ages, all demographics is important, but knowing how important our young people are into driving this. We're going to see in about a week, right? A week from today, what our efforts do. So I would admonish you all to continue these conversations, right? This very one, take that to your family, take it to your peers and your friends, and have it just as naturally as we did today.
Yes, oh, yes. I think everything, I can't say it any better than what you have just said. The one thing I would like for you all to take away from this is how we define, number one, what the issues are today, and also, like, take for instance, right now, I'm working on the term perspective and also social impact, okay? But what does social impact mean to you? What does it mean to you? And what does it mean to you? It's not the same. And you talked about those special interest groups, the big lobbyists, okay? Their definition of social impact, I can guarantee you, is different than your definition of social impact. So those are the type of things that determine policy, and it makes their way in there. It was just in the 70s that they changed, I believe, the right to vote from 21 down to 18. And so it hasn't been, you could say, a very long time, And at the same time, at 18, they were still sending, young people off. I'll say young men, they were sending them off to war. You think about that, okay? But it's just been since the 70s that they changed that from 21 down to 18. And so when we look at that, I want you to begin to realize your definitions of what you believe that you want us to begin to look at, or what should be driving policy, your hand in that, and what you say about it, and what you put out there in the air, whether it's TikTok, Instagram. I use Facebook, so if you really want me, friend me or whatever it is. So because I will, read what you have to say. And so since that's the way, that I use social media, you got to, come back to me, okay? I'm only on TikTok because somebody, I don't know, I might have been Javon, he might have put me on TikTok, but I don't even know how to use it. I just read what's on there, okay? And the only reason why I'm looking at Instagram is because my granddaughter is sending me pictures of what she's doing. I don't know how I got on that either, but at the point that I'm trying to make, you have to come to me too, okay? The same way I'm making an outreach to you, okay? And the same reason why I'm here at the Black Chamber is because I want to discover what you think and what you want. At the same time, I need your support
That's right.
in ensuring that what I am doing is what you want, because that is what matters the most. And so I want you to know that you all are going to be the driving force, or who's going to be in that White House. And so you really need to get out there and not only vote, but take some of your friends, take some of your family members, and talk to them privately. It's still time, to influence people about voting. I'm really impressed about some of the things that I heard here today. I mean, you brought up the Electoral College, and
you got a
I'm like,
job waiting
that
for
was
you.
different. I didn't expect to hear that. At the same time, too, economic concerns and climate change and education and access, healthcare and social services, political representation, civic engagement. We did talk about that. We talked a lot about the social media and misinformation. We talked about that. Housing affordability, and so, and also the future of work, on what you want. So I'm really going to be looking at, because you are a news producer. I'm going to see what you can do to get the youthful approach, okay? And so in a debate, don't forget, you not only want to hear what you have to say, but you want to hear what I have to say too. And I want you to stop calling people old people. I just use the term older. I don't even mind senior, because I'm happy to still be alive. Let me just put it like that. And so I just want to thank you for allowing us to come into the chamber, and that you accepted this idea that came from our young people. To do something like this, but also that we do understand that young people really do need to get out to vote, and this is what we're pushing for. Those of us that are out there voting, my age, we're going to continue to do that. But one of the driving forces for me was that my son, who is in his 30s, who is what we call the super prime voter, when he was living here, okay, it's in California now, talking about, I'm not happy with either one of them. And I'm still trying to convince him, you must go and vote, okay? And so that made me realize, okay, if somebody's 18 or older, I need you to get out there, but it's going to take your peers.
That's right.
You all are the ones that are going to be the driving force to make it, you talk to each other, okay? And so, but again, thank you so much for
Thank
doing
you.
this. I really
My
appreciate it.
pleasure. Our
And
pleasure.
hope that this isn't the last time that
It
we
won't.
get together.
It won't be. So make sure that you know where your polling location is. If you haven't, do not wait to the last minute. Make sure that you do that research now. If you choose to vote early, again, make sure that you're bringing one or two people with you as well. But if all that fails, November 5th, a week away, cast your vote.